welcome once again to the garden path. The garden puddle is drying up, but in spite of that, we still have a lot of gray weather and it's very dark, which makes me doubly anxious to enjoy color spots in the garden, and that's what we'll talk about this week. This lovely little purple is Obretia, and it will spread along the edge of the rocks and cover the very edge and creep over in the next couple of weeks. And behind the Obretia is a very pretty pink rhododendron that was actually bred in Nova Scotia. This is Rhododendron Grand Pré, which is one of my favorites. I have so many favorites. When they're blooming, they're all my favorite. Tulips are a real hot spot. We have two colors of Darwin tulips. We prefer not to mix them. We have the bright red and we have a yellow, which is a real flash of color that leads us into the other part of the garden. The crevice garden is starting to bloom. There is a small pink plant called Androsaceae, which is a really pretty little thing, not very easy to come by, and a variety of primula. This is one of the larger forms, and beside it there are some very small primula that are doing quite nicely as well. Another Darwin tulip, a bright yellow. I've actually had to cut a number of these tulips this spring because they've grown so fast and so tall because of the lack of light that they've been affected by rot mid-stem and flopped right over. However, some of them are okay. The leaves are spotty, but the flowers are a treat in this dull weather. Grape hyacinths have enjoyed the water this year. They're a really lovely intense blue, but I found that in some areas they've become so lush they've flopped over on other plants, and I'm going to have to dig and divide the bulbs. They've just enjoyed it too much. And behind me is a favorite rhododendron, not the easiest to bloom. This is an early one called Elvira. Last year it was smothered in red flowers, and this year the buds just aren't coming out the way they usually do. Welsh poppies bloom readily, easily dividable, and they're almost like weeds. This little poppy is very closely related to the Welsh poppies, and it's a bit earlier, and it will grow in shade, and even though it gets to be a bit of a nuisance, I love it, and I always keep some. The little anemones that we talked about last time, Anemone sylvestris, have been in bloom for 3 weeks and are still lovely, and there's another Lithyrus over here, a Lithyrus vernus roseus, which is a quite unusual little plant but seems to be doing well in the shade. And beside that there's a double anemone, which is a little more unusual. So these plants are all fairly long lasting, but the Magnolia soulangeana that we talked about last week was in full bud at that point, and now it's finished or finishing and dropping the petals and the leaves are coming out. So in contrast to the anemones, it's a very short-lived flower, but a very dramatic one. We're always moving plants around the garden, and one of the plants that we moved recently is an Opuntia cactus, and Lloyd has a very interesting, if thorny, story about that one.
Barbara liked this urn that I had on top of the hill behind us here, and she wondered if we brought it down here with the cactus that's in it, would grow better. So I said, fine, I'll bring it down. Well, it is a bit heavy, and when I was putting it down, inadvertently I gave the cactus a little hug. And when I went into the house later and was taking off my outside shirt and so on, I felt a rather prickly feeling on my chest. I took off my t-shirt, and yes, there were thousands of little needles stuck into my chest. My wife was quite concerned, as was my daughter, and she said, get tweezers. I got some tweezers for her. She tried pulling them out, and then she said, Dad, there are just too many. So we called up the doctor and had an appointment organized. And then my daughter even called a manicurist or somebody that does waxing to see if that would work there. And then I thought, well, I'll go online and see something. Went online, and sure enough, there were stories of people from Texas who had inadvertently sat on some of those cushion cacti and got thousands of little needles stuck in a sit-down place. So I decided I would use their method. That was to use Elmer's glue. Sounds strange, but it works well. I lay on the couch and my wife splattered on my chest one layer of Elmer's glue, We dried it with the hair dryer, and then another layer came on top of that, dried it again, and then it was the time for taking it off. Well, there is certainly, in my age, a fair bit of hair growing on my chest, and it was an ordeal. It hurt a little bit, but all the remnants of the little needles have gone. So I would advise people that if you're going to move any plant that has cacti, don't give them a hug. That's all for the garden path this week. Come back again next week.